The massive alien throne room stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls made of some strange glowing material that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above, while thousands of alien beings from across the galaxy filled the tiered seating that surrounded the central floor. Their various forms created a sea of scales, fur, tentacles, and stranger shapes that human eyes could barely comprehend. At the center of this grand spectacle sat Emperor Vorth on his throne of black metal and crimson gems. The alien ruler stood nearly 12 feet tall, his reptilian body covered in dark green scales that shifted color with his moods. 4 arms extended from his massive torso, each ending in clawed hands that could crush a human skull without effort. His elongated head held 6 glowing yellow eyes that missed nothing, and when he spoke, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleamed in the strange light. Below the throne, prowling in a wide circle, was the creature that had brought them all here today. The Night Stalker moved like liquid shadow given form, its body seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Standing 8 feet at the shoulder, it resembled no earth animal Jake had ever seen. Its limbs were too long, too flexible, bending in ways that hurt to watch. Claws the length of kitchen knives clicked against the crystal floor with each step, leaving deep scratches in the supposedly unbreakable surface. But it was the eyes that made even hardened warriors look away, burning red coals that seemed to peer directly into a person's soul and find them wanting. The beast had good reason for its rage. 7 alien tamers had entered that circle in the past month, each one representing a different species, each one carrying weapons and tools designed to break the will of wild creatures. None had left alive. The Night Stalker had torn through energy nets, shrugged off stunning weapons, and turned every attempt at dominance into a bloodbath that stained the crystal floor. The cleaning crews had worked for hours after each attempt, but Jake could still see dark spots where the stone had absorbed something that would never wash clean. The small human delegation looked impossibly tiny in this vast space. Ambassador Williams, a stern woman with graying hair, stood rigid with diplomatic protocol even as sweat beaded on her forehead. Captain Torres kept his hand near his weapon, though they all knew it would be useless against either the creature or the hundreds of alien guards surrounding them. Both adults had decades of experience dealing with hostile alien species, but this situation was beyond anything in their training manuals. Emperor Vorth's voice filled the chamber like rolling thunder, each word carefully chosen to humiliate the humans before his court. His offer wasn't generosity, it was a death sentence wrapped in mockery. Kepler 442b was a world the humans desperately needed for their expanding population, a planet with breathable air and fertile soil that could support millions of colonists. But the Emperor knew no human could survive 5 minutes with the Night Stalker, let alone tame it. The alien courtiers whispered among themselves in dozens of different languages, their voices creating a sound like wind through a forest of metal leaves. Some laughed openly at the ridiculous spectacle, while others placed bets on how quickly the humans would die. A few of the more diplomatic species remained silent, but their body language spoke volumes about their expectations. That's when young Jake Thompson made his move. The 10-year-old boy had been standing quietly behind his father, Ambassador Thompson, taking in every detail of the scene with the intense curiosity that only children possessed. While the adults focused on political implications and diplomatic consequences, Jake watched the Night Stalker with different eyes. He saw past the claws and the burning gaze to something else, something that reminded him of the injured animals he'd helped on his family's ranch back on New Terra. His father reached out to stop him, but Jake was already walking forward with the confident stride of a child who had never learned that some things were impossible. The entire chamber fell silent as this small human figure approached the deadliest predator in known space. The Night Stalker turned its attention to him, muscles tensing for what everyone assumed would be another swift kill. But Jake wasn't afraid, and somehow, impossibly, the creature seemed to sense that difference. Jake took another step forward, his small sneakers making almost no sound on the crystal floor. Every alien in the massive chamber seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when the Night Stalker would pounce and tear the human boy apart. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost touch it. Even the Emperor's guards, standing at attention around the throne, found themselves leaning forward slightly, their alien faces showing something that might have been concern. The Night Stalker's muscles bunched under its dark fur as it prepared to spring. Its powerful hind legs could launch its massive body across the 20-foot gap between them in less than a heartbeat. Those terrible claws, each one sharp enough to slice through steel, extended fully from its paws. The creature's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of teeth that looked like black daggers designed for tearing flesh from bone. Everything about its posture screamed danger, death, and violence. But Jake saw something different. Back on New Texas, his family's ranch had been home to dozens of different species, some gentle, some wild, all of them with their own personalities and needs. He remembered the first time he'd encountered a razorback wolf, a predator twice his size that had wandered onto their property during a drought. While his parents reached for their rifles, Jake had noticed the way the animal's ears kept twitching, how its eyes darted constantly to the horizon, how it moved with the jerky motions of something pushed beyond its limits by desperation. His sister Lucy had always teased him about his strange connection with animals. She'd watch him spend hours sitting quietly with injured creatures, never trying to force them to trust him, just being present until they decided he wasn't a threat. Their parents had called it a gift, but Jake knew it was simpler than that. He just paid attention to what the animals were really saying with their body language, their sounds, their behavior. Now, looking at the Night Stalker, he saw the same signs he'd learned to recognize in every frightened, angry creature he'd ever helped. The way its tail lashed wasn't just aggression, it was frustration. The constant low growl wasn't a threat, it was a sound of distress, like a dog whimpering after being hurt. Most telling of all was how the creature kept glancing toward the walls of the chamber, as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Jake stopped just outside the creature's striking range and slowly knelt down, making himself smaller and less threatening. The movement caused a ripple of gasps from the watching aliens, but he ignored them completely. His focus was entirely on the Night Stalker, reading its body language like a book written in a language only he seemed to understand. "Hey there, big guy," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying clearly in the silent chamber. "I bet you hate this place, don't you? All these strange smells, all these weird sounds, all these creatures staring at you like you're some kind of monster." The Night Stalker's growling faltered for just a moment, its burning red eyes focusing on Jake's face with an intensity that made several aliens take involuntary steps backward. But there was something different in that gaze now, not just rage and pain, but a flicker of confusion, as if the creature couldn't quite figure out what this small human was doing. Jake continued talking in that same quiet, understanding tone that had worked with frightened animals back home. "You're not a monster, are you? You're just lost and scared and angry because nobody understands what you need. They keep trying to hurt you, to force you to do things, but that's not what you want at all." As he spoke, Jake very slowly extended one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. He'd learned long ago that this was the universal gesture of peaceful intent among most species, showing that he carried no weapons, that he meant no harm. The movement was so gradual that it was almost impossible to see, like watching grass grow. The effect on the Night Stalker was immediate and shocking. The creature's entire body went rigid, every muscle freezing in place as if Jake had cast some kind of spell. Its claws, which had been fully extended and ready to strike, slowly retracted until only the tips were visible. The constant growling that had filled the chamber for weeks suddenly stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Emperor Vortha's 6 eyes widened in disbelief, his scaled face shifting from its usual dark green to a lighter shade that indicated surprise among his species. This wasn't possible. Nothing could calm a Night Stalker. His best scientists had studied the creatures for years, determining them to be nothing more than mindless killing machines driven by instinct and rage. Yet here was a human child, barely old enough to attend school, doing something that had never been done before. Jake settled into a comfortable sitting position on the crystal floor, completely ignoring the hundreds of alien eyes watching his every move. He'd learned from working with animals back home that patience was more important than any tool or weapon. The key was to move at the creature's pace, not his own. He could sit here for hours if that's what it took. The Night Stalker remained frozen in place, its massive head tilted slightly to one side as it studied this strange human child. Jake could see intelligence flickering behind those burning red eyes, not the simple cunning of a wild animal, but something deeper. Something that recognized the difference between his approach and everything else it had experienced in this horrible place. Minutes passed in absolute silence. Jake didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even shift his weight. He simply sat there, radiating the same calm energy he'd always used with frightened animals. Back on New Texas, he'd spent entire afternoons like this with injured creatures, waiting for them to decide whether he could be trusted. Finally, the Night Stalker took a single step forward. It was barely more than a twitch of movement, but in the dead silence of the chamber, it sounded like thunder. Several alien courtiers gasped, and Jake could hear his father's sharp intake of breath behind him. But he didn't react at all, keeping his expression completely neutral and welcoming. Another step. Then another. The creature moved with incredible caution, testing each footfall as if the ground might give way beneath it. Its nostrils flared constantly, reading scents that Jake couldn't even imagine. Every few seconds, it would freeze completely, listening for sounds or threats that only it could detect. When the Night Stalker was finally close enough that Jake could see his own reflection in its eyes, it did something that made the entire court gasp in shock. It lowered its massive head until it was level with Jake's face, studying him from just inches away. The creature's breath was warm against his skin, carrying strange alien scents that reminded him of thunderstorms and deep forests. Jake smiled, not a forced expression, but the genuine warmth he'd always felt when connecting with a new animal friend. "There you go," he whispered. "See? I'm not going to hurt you. Nobody here is going to hurt you anymore." The Night Stalker's response was extraordinary. A sound emerged from deep in its chest, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a purr but deeper and more complex. It was a sound of relief, of recognition, of connection. Several aliens in the audience stumbled backward, having never heard a Night Stalker make any noise except snarls and roars of rage. Over the next hour, Jake began working with his new friend using techniques he developed over years of helping animals. He never raised his voice, never made sudden movements, never tried to force anything. Instead, he offered suggestions through gentle gestures and soft words, always giving the creature a choice about whether to respond. When he slowly stood up, the Night Stalker watched carefully but didn't tense or prepare to attack. When Jake took a small step to the right, the creature's head tracked the movement with curiosity rather than aggression. And when Jake patted his leg gently and said, "Come here, friend," the massive predator actually took several steps toward him. Ambassador Thompson felt his knees go weak as he watched his son accomplish something that defied everything the galaxy knew about these creatures. The boy was actually communicating with a Night Stalker, not controlling it through fear or force, but building a genuine relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. General Korax, the Emperor's top military advisor, stood speechless beside the throne. His 4 arms hung limp at his sides, and his usually confident posture had crumpled into something approaching amazement. For decades, he'd studied these creatures as weapons, trying to find ways to harness their killing power for the Empire's armies. The idea that one could be befriended by a child was shaking the very foundations of everything he believed about warfare and domination. But Jake was learning something even more important as he spent time with the creature. Through subtle changes in its behavior, through the sounds it made, through the way it moved and reacted, he began to understand the source of its rage and violence. This wasn't a monster at all, it was a social creature that had been ripped away from everything it knew and loved. The Night Stalker kept making small vocalizations, complex sounds that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple animal communication. Its eyes would dart toward the walls of the chamber, then back to Jake, as if trying to explain something urgent. When it moved, there was a quality to its steps that reminded Jake of the way pack animals moved back home, always aware of where the other members of their group were, always ready to coordinate their actions with their family. That's when the horrible truth hit him. This creature wasn't just intelligent, it was desperately, achingly lonely. It had been torn away from its pack, its family, its entire world, and thrown into this alien environment where everything smelled wrong and sounded wrong and felt wrong. The violence, the rage, the refusal to be tamed, it was all the behavior of a creature grieving for everything it had lost. Jake's heart broke for his new friend, and in that moment of pure empathy, something magical happened. The Night Stalker seemed to sense his understanding, his genuine sorrow for its situation. The creature pressed its massive head against Jake's chest in a gesture so gentle and trusting that several aliens in the audience actually started to weep. The transformation in Emperor Vorth was terrifying to witness. His massive body began to shake with fury, and the scales covering his reptilian form shifted through a spectrum of colors that every alien in the chamber recognized as extreme rage. What had started as dark green flesh now blazed with deep purples and angry reds, creating patterns that seemed to writhe across his skin like living flames. His 6 yellow eyes, normally cold and calculating, now burned with a hatred so intense that several courtiers in the front rows actually stepped backward. The Emperor's 4 powerful arms clenched into fists, each one large enough to crush a human skull. The claws at the tips of his fingers extended fully, gleaming like polished daggers in the strange light of the crystal chamber. When he rose from his throne, the massive seat creaked under the shifting weight, and his full height of 12 feet cast a shadow across half the floor where Jake and the Night Stalker stood together. For Emperor Vorth, this wasn't just about losing a bet or being embarrassed in front of his court. His entire philosophy of rule, everything he had built his empire upon, was crumbling before his eyes. For 300 years, he had conquered world after world by proving that only the strongest deserved to survive. His armies had crushed civilizations, his scientists had created the most terrible weapons in the galaxy, and his name was whispered in fear across 1,000 star systems. The Night Stalkers were supposed to be the ultimate proof of his philosophy. These creatures were pure violence given form, impossible to reason with, impossible to tame, impossible to control through anything except superior force. He had captured dozens of them from their home world, planning to breed them into an army of unstoppable killers that would make his empire invincible. But now a 10-year-old human boy had accomplished what his greatest military minds insisted was impossible. Worse than that, the child had done it through kindness, the one quality that Emperor Vorth had spent centuries trying to eliminate from his domain. If word of this spread throughout the galaxy, it would inspire rebellions, give hope to the enslaved worlds, and show everyone that there were alternatives to his iron-fisted rule. The Emperor's roar of rage shook the crystal walls of the chamber, sending vibrations through the floor that made several smaller aliens lose their footing. "Impossible," he bellowed, his voice carrying the fury of a tyrant who had never been challenged. "No creature bows to weakness. This is some human trick, some technological deception designed to make fools of us all." His accusation of sorcery sent a ripple of nervous energy through the assembled court. Many of the alien species present came from cultures where supernatural forces were very real and very feared. The idea that humans might possess magical abilities was both fascinating and terrifying to beings who had built their understanding of the universe around science and technology. General Korax, standing beside the throne, seemed to snap out of his amazement at his emperor's words. The military commander's own face darkened as he processed what this display might mean for their carefully planned campaigns of conquest. If humans could tame their deadliest weapons through simple compassion, it would make their armies vulnerable in ways they had never considered. The Emperor's command echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. Immediately, 20 of his elite guards began moving toward the center of the floor, their energy weapons humming to life with sounds like angry wasps. These soldiers were the largest, most dangerous warriors in the Emperor's service, each one standing 8 feet tall and armed with weapons capable of cutting through solid steel. But they had barely taken 3 steps when something unprecedented happened. The Night Stalker, which moments before had been nuzzling Jake's chest with gentle affection, transformed instantly into a living weapon. Its massive body flowed into a defensive position in front of the boy, every muscle coiled and ready for violence. The creature's shadow-like fur seemed to absorb the light around it, making it appear even larger and more menacing than before. The sound that emerged from the Night Stalker's throat was unlike anything the court had heard before. It wasn't the mindless roar of a beast driven by instinct, it was the calculated warning of an intelligent creature defending something precious. The growl started deep in its chest and built to a volume that made the crystal walls of the chamber ring like bells. Several of the advancing guards actually stumbled, their confidence shaken by the sheer presence of the creature they had watched kill 7 of their colleagues. Jake's father, Ambassador Thompson, felt every instinct screaming at him to grab his son and run. But he also knew that any sudden movement now might trigger a bloodbath that would end with all of them dead. Instead, he stepped carefully forward, placing himself between the guards and his boy, while keeping his hands visible and empty to show he meant no immediate threat. Captain Torres moved with him, her military training taking over even as her mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. The 3 humans now formed a small group at the center of the vast chamber, protected by a creature that should have been their executioner, facing down an empire that could crush their entire species without breaking a sweat. But Jake himself remained completely calm. While chaos erupted around him, while armies prepared for battle and empires trembled on the edge of war, the 10-year-old boy simply placed one small hand on his friend's massive flank and looked up at the raging emperor with eyes that held no fear whatsoever. The tension in the crystal chamber was so thick it felt like breathing through water. Every alien present understood they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for centuries to come. The emperor stood frozen on his throne, his rage warring with the political reality of his situation. He had made his promise in front of representatives from dozens of worlds, and breaking his word now would destroy his reputation across the galaxy. Jake looked up at the towering alien ruler, his small hand still resting gently on the Night Stalker's flank. The massive creature had settled into a relaxed sitting position, but its burning red eyes remained alert, ready to defend its young human friend at a moment's notice. The sight of the galaxy's most feared predator acting like a protective pet was something that would haunt the nightmares of every military strategist present. But what Jake said next shocked the court even more than his taming of the creature. "Your Majesty, you promised to give humanity Kepler 442b if I could tame the Night Stalker," the boy began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space despite its quiet tone. "I've done what you asked, but I don't want to claim the planet for my people." A wave of confused murmurs swept through the assembled aliens. Ambassador Thompson felt his heart skip a beat, wondering what his son was planning. They desperately needed that world, Earth was overcrowded, and several human colonies were struggling to support their growing populations. Kepler 442b represented hope for millions of families looking for a new start among the stars. Jake continued, seemingly oblivious to the political storm his words were creating. Through my friend here, I've learned something terrible. Kepler 442b isn't just a planet with resources to be taken, it's a living world that's dying because of how it's being treated. The Night Stalker made a low sound, not quite a growl but something deeper and more complex. Jake nodded as if he understood perfectly, then looked back up at the Emperor. The mining operations, the industrial plants, the weapons testing, it's all poisoning the ecosystems that creatures like the Night Stalkers need to survive. That's why this one was so angry and violent. It wasn't just separated from its pack, it was watching its entire world being destroyed. General Korak stepped forward, his forearms spread in a gesture of dismissal. Ridiculous. The planet's resources are being harvested efficiently. A few animals dying is a small price to pay for the materials we need to expand the empire. But Jake's words had already started a reaction throughout the court. Several alien species present came from worlds that had suffered ecological disasters due to aggressive resource extraction. They knew firsthand how quickly a thriving planet could become a barren wasteland when short-term profits were valued over long-term sustainability. Ambassador Thompson suddenly understood what his son was proposing, and despite his diplomatic training, he felt a surge of pride that almost brought tears to his eyes. Jake wasn't just offering to solve one problem, he was proposing an entirely new way for different species to interact with each other and with the worlds they shared. Your Majesty, Ambassador Thompson said, stepping forward to stand beside his son, humanity has always been different from most galactic civilizations. We didn't conquer our home world, we learned to live in harmony with it. Our greatest achievements have come not from dominating nature, but from understanding it and working with it. The Emperor's scales were still shifting through angry colors, but Jake could see uncertainty flickering in his 6 yellow eyes. The ruler was clearly trying to figure out if this was some elaborate human trick or if the boy was being sincere. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a portable data pad that contained information about Earth's history. With his father's help, he activated a holographic display that showed images of Earth cities integrated with natural forests, of human technology designed to work alongside natural ecosystems rather than replacing them. We're not asking to take Kepler 442b away from you, Jake explained as the images played out above his palm. We're asking to help you save it. Humans have spent thousands of years learning how to live with other species instead of just using them. We could teach those same techniques to your people. The hologram shifted to show before and after images of damaged Earth environments that had been restored through careful human stewardship. Polluted rivers running clear again, extinct species brought back from genetic samples, entire ecosystems rebuilt from the ground up through patient, dedicated work that sometimes took generations to complete. Captain Torres added her voice to the proposal, her military background giving weight to her words. Your Majesty, what if instead of fighting to control your worlds, you could make them stronger? What if instead of extracting resources until planets die, you could create sustainable systems that would produce wealth for thousands of years? The court erupted in discussions as representatives from various worlds began to see the implications of what the humans were offering. Several species had been struggling with environmental collapse on their home planets. Others had given up entirely on worlds that had been strip-mined into lifeless rocks, abandoning them to search for new places to exploit. But the most powerful moment came when Jake approached the Emperor's throne, the Night Stalker walking calmly beside him. The boy's small figure looked impossibly tiny next to the massive alien ruler, but there was something in his posture that commanded respect from beings 100 times his size. Your Majesty, Jake said softly, you built your empire by being stronger than everyone else. But what if you could build something even greater? What if you could be remembered not as a conqueror, but as the leader who saved whole worlds and created peace between species that had been fighting for centuries? The Emperor stared down at the human child for a long moment, his alien mind processing possibilities he had never considered before. Around them, the court held its breath, waiting to see whether this moment would lead to a new age of cooperation or to the systematic destruction of the human species for their presumption. Finally, slowly, Emperor Vorth began to smile, an expression that revealed far too many sharp teeth but somehow managed to convey genuine amusement rather than threat.